Terrence Anderson, and this is Biorhythms. We want to thank you for watching us and continue to tell all of your friends about this exciting new homegrown program produced right here in Hampton Roads. Biorhythms is brought to you by KRT LLC, providing full-service tank cleaning, painting, fire watch, and shipboard maintenance for marine, industrial, government, and commercial businesses. The KRT website is www.k-r-tllc.com, and you can call them at 757-228-3452. KRT LLC, your leading provider in quality shipboard solutions. And we have a very special woman with us today, a woman that I've known for a number of years now, who happens to be the owner and the publisher of the New Journal Guide, the oldest African-American newspaper in the state of Virginia and the third oldest African-American newspaper in the country. Brenda Andrews.
Hello, hello, hello.
I want to thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So let's get right into it, because I want everybody to know who you are. Where were you born? Where are you from?
I'm a native of Lynchburg, Virginia.
Lynchburg?
Yes, I'm up from those mountains up there.
And you went to, how long did you live in Lynchburg?
Until I graduated from high school. I went to the public school, through the public school system. I was one of the children to desegregate the public school system in Lynchburg. And graduated from E.C. Glass High School as one of 4 blacks.
4 blacks out of how many students?
About 2,500.
2,500. I want to talk about that a little bit more, but what was your early childhood like living in Lynchburg?
Well,
what kind of kid were you?
Oh, I was one of those kids who enjoyed reading and being a little bossy, because
I've never known you to be bossy.
No, not me, but I like to play school. You know, back then, you may remember, we actually played.
Oh, yes.
With things. We didn't have.
Something was wrong with us.
We must. No. Well, I guess some of us we'd be called geeks today. I guess. Right. But I enjoyed being the teacher, and because I had more books, I guess, than anybody else, that I took that privilege of being the teacher.
Why did you like reading so much? What did you get out of reading?
I think reading just gives you the opportunity to move into a whole new world. I enjoy mostly nonfiction. I enjoy true stories as opposed to fiction reading. I like to learn. You learn by reading. It's a whole world, an adventure for me. You
had to make that transition from being in essentially what was probably a segregated society to going to E.C. Glass High School. What was that like?
Yes. Well, it was quite shocking, to be perfectly honest. Although we were prepared to go to an integrated or desegregated school, because we envisioned ourselves perhaps as soldiers of the civil rights movement, and we were warriors on the battlefield, if you must. And so we expected to undergo the kinds of things that were being printed in the book, being called names, being called out of our name, and even possibly some students experienced violence even, but we never experienced any of that in Lynchburg. We were more civil, but we did experience a lot of name calling and a lot of emotional racism. When you walk in a room and people jump up and run across the room, and I think I wasn't prepared for the depth of, I don't know if it was so much hatred. I don't think it was hatred. I just think we were dealing with people who had never been in an environment with people of color other than as people that worked for them, never as equals. And so there was that resistance to us as black people.
How do you think that experience informed your life? How do you think it impacted? Did it? Surely it must have had some kind of impact on you.
I'm sure it did impact my life. I think that as since then, it took me a while to get through some of that trauma, emotional trauma, but it made me a stronger person. I'd always been a leader, and so it just helped in that leadership quality that I had already had, those skills that I had. And it helped me to just know that I could endure some kinds of emotional disorder.
So you had already started with your interest in reading as a little girl. Did you continue that while in high school?
Yeah, I've always. English is what I majored in when I went to college. I've always had an interest in communications, the communication skills.
And what did you go to school?
I started in Richmond at what was then Richmond Professional Institute, but now is known as Virginia Commonwealth University. The great big, every time I go there, I can't believe how it has grown and continues to grow every year. But I actually graduated in California.
That's because you met someone.
I met someone, my first husband, a very special person at RPI, and we ended up as husband and wife. And he was in the Air Force, and so was stationed in California. That's how we got to California.
And this again was Sacramento.
Yes.
Okay. So, what was your major in?
English.
Okay.
And education. I got it at that time. I don't know if they still do it, but at that time my bachelor's was in English, and then there was the requirement to do a 5th year just for the education part of it, to be able to teach. And so that's what I got my teaching credential.
And so when you graduated from, what was it, Sacramento State?
At that time it was Sacramento State College.
Okay.
Now it's called California State University at Sacramento. They've put them all together under the university system.
And you began teaching shortly after that. You started teaching after graduation.
I taught for a short time in a suburb of Sacramento.
And what did you do after that? You taught for a little while?
Taught for a little while, and then my first husband and I decided to part, and I decided to do something different with my life outside of the classroom, and I joined the Army.
You joined the Army?
I was actually a soldier. I mean, I'm a trained killer.
Well, I would never have known. Okay.
But actually, I injured my knee during basic training, which I think it was 9 weeks or something like that. And I injured my knee shortly after I started doing exercising. I slipped on the grass because we'd have to do exercises early when the dew was on the ground. And so I had an option to get out. I mean, like a month or so after I joined. But being the kind of person I am, and I guess this goes back also to E.C. Glass, I don't quit. I'm not a quitter.
Well, I don't want you to quit right now, but we're going to take a little bit of a break, okay? And when we come back, we're going to get into this a lot more.
Okay, no.
We're going to ask you to stay tuned with us for the next segment of Biorhythms with Brenda Andrews. Welcome back. When we last were talking to Miss Andrews, she slipped and fell. And this is in basic training?
In basic training, and I injured my knee, which required, I tore a ligament or something. Anyway, it required that I use crutches. And so I didn't want to leave the military because I'm not, as I was saying, once I start a project, I just like to finish it. And so in order to actually finish basic, I had to do certain things. I had to learn to throw grenades, and I had to learn to shoot a rifle, and I had to walk on 10-mile, they weren't hikes, but that's what they, what we call them. But, and I did that. I did that on crutches.
Wow.
But before I could graduate, I had to run without the crutches. I had to do the 2-mile run in whatever time it was at that time. And when I did that, I was just overwhelmed.
Well, that gave you remarkable discipline for the rest of your life.
Remarkable discipline, yes.
So after the military, well, let's continue. When you were in the military, you worked in public affairs?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Tell us about that.
I was in public affairs and stationed 2 years in Nuremberg, Germany.
And what did you do there?
I was the editor of the Post newspaper.
Okay.
And then I came back to the States, and I was at the Pentagon in Army News Service, which is comparable to the Associated Press wire service. The stories we wrote went out to all Army newspapers across the country and the world, actually.
So the military played a pivotal role in your
Yes.
going into the press.
Yes, well, that's where I really got my journalism training, because my degree and my teaching experience were in English, classroom English, grammar and writing and reading and that sort of thing, not journalism, though.
The experience in the military, you were the editor of the Post newspaper, but you also did television and radio?
Yes, well, as part of the public affairs field, we went to a training. We were trained in both print and broadcast media. And so particularly when I was in Germany, I had opportunities to do radio as well as a little TV.
Okay.
A little.
A little TV. So after the military, you decided you're living in Metro DC, working at the
Yes,
Pentagon, but something brought you to Hampton Roads.
Yes, the need to make money to support myself and my son. Because after I got out of the military, I had planned and wanted to stay in the Washington, D.C. area. But it was a little expensive, and so I ended up here where I had family, I still have family in Hampton Roads. And I met the owner and publisher of the Journal and Guide, who was looking for someone with credentials such as I. And he hired me. I remember, and we joked for years, that I said I was looking for an opportunity. And I didn't know the wheels were rolling in his head that were saying, have I got an opportunity, a challenge for you? And it has been 32 years of a challenge at the Journal and Guide.
What did you start out doing at the Guide?
Started out, first title, I was actually hired to be the editor of the paper. But once I got on board, I became the assistant to the publisher, which put me in touch not only with the newsroom, but other aspects of the newspaper, the business office, advertising, and so forth. And I became the assistant to the publisher, and then the executive publisher, and in 1987, I became the publisher. And in 1991, I became the owner and publisher.
Owner and publisher.
Yes.
Now, did you contribute at all as a writer to the Journal and Guide?
Well, I've always done some writing, but not necessarily news stories. I've done editorials. I don't do as much writing as I'd like to, mainly because we have a very small staff, and timing does not allow me to do the kind of writing I'd like to do. But I still do. Especially if it's something that I feel very strongly about.
What can you share about the new Journal and Guide that will make our viewers say, "Oh, I didn't know that"?
Well, I think that most people don't realize that the Journal and Guide has an illustrious history. We have, if you can imagine, 114 years of contribution to the history of African Americans in this country. We've covered every major event in America that has significance to African American history over that 114 years. We sent correspondence to Europe in the 1940s, which was the heyday period of all black press, but particularly our newspaper. We had correspondents, we had reporters. We covered the maiden voyage of the first naval vessel that had a majority African American workforce. We were there in Scottsboro, the Scottsboro trial of the 1930s. That was such a significant, at that time, part of the history of lynchings, and we covered that. We covered the Great Migration. We've covered so much history in this country that, and the good thing is we're on microfilm, and our newspaper has digital files, so we're actually able to access that information via the computer.
We're going to be right back in just a few. This beautiful lady that I'm talking to today is Miss Brenda Andrews, owner and publisher of the New Journal and Guide. We've been having some very interesting conversation about the Guide's history. And I didn't know that. Maybe I had heard that about the Guide having dispatched journalists to cover the war.
Yes.
World War II?
World War II. We were in World War I too, but World War II is where we really made our presence. We had not just one, but several reporters and photographers who were sent abroad. In fact, there were 5 black newspapers in the country that did that kind of reporting, and we were the group that sent stories back for other newspapers, all of the black newspapers across the country. The Journal and Guide was the only one south of the Mason-Dixon line. The others were the Chicago Defender, Baltimore, Pittsburgh Courier, New York, Amsterdam News. But the Journal and Guide, being in the South, and being able to do that, I think speaks a lot about the type of newspaper that was being published. It was a massive operation. At one time, the Guide was the single largest employer of black labor in the South. We had a tremendous operation going on.
And it was founded by?
It actually was founded by a group of men, a benevolent group, back in the late 1800s. 1900 is when it was a newsletter, and P.B. Young came on board as the editor of the newsletter for that group, and purchased it and turned it into a newspaper.
Fantastic. So over all of those years documenting African American history.
Yes.
You spoke about your own experiences in desegregating E.C. Glass School in Lynchburg, but that kind of thing was going on here at the same time, and no doubt the Journal and Guide was covering those events as well.
And not just the Journal and Guide wasn't covering only what was happening in Norfolk, it was covering all across the nation. It has always had a national focus as well as a strong local focus.
So when did it become the New Journal and Guide?
Actually it has been the New Journal and Guide down through the years. It's been the Journal and Guide, it's been the New Journal and Guide, it's been the Norfolk Journal and Guide, but it most recently became the New Journal and Guide in 1991 when I became the owner.
And the whole idea is just stepping it up to a new level.
Yes, to a new level. In fact, my aunt, who's no longer with us on this side of the water, she said, when people would say, when did it become the new, and why did you put that? She said, well, you know, there's new Tide and there's new everything, so now there's the new Journal and Guide, too.
And speaking of new, technology has changed over the years, and so it's gone from a printed paper to being both printed and online.
Yes, digital formatting is not just something for the future, it's very much real currently, and so in order to keep abreast of the trends and to bring in new readers, to bring in particularly younger readers who rely more on online and websites and all of the social media pointers that are going on, we also are following that trend.
Mm-hmm. The technology, the internet and social media and so forth has had a significant impact on papers across the country, and that must be especially so for an African-American newspaper that tends to have a much smaller readership.
Absolutely, and also because the African-American community, the people who historically have supported the African-American press tend to be an older group of people, and that older group of people tends more toward print rather than digital, and so
I can relate to that.
Yes, and so it would be, we feel an obligation, not just we at the Journal and Guide, but other black newspapers, an obligation to continue the print publication as we move into the digital age, to support our strongest and most loyal readership base, but also to encourage a new readership.
With the papers like the New Journal and Guide in the African American community playing such a potent voice, recognized by the readership as well as recognized by people that don't necessarily subscribe or not in that demographic. What would you say, how would you reach out to those people to tell them, to give an urgent call that the papers like the New Journal and Guide need to be preserved because of the important role that they have played historically as a voice of a people?
You hit it so clearly on the head. I think people value the history of black newspapers, but don't fully understand the relevancy or the importance of maintaining and preserving them in the present time period. And the answer that I give to that question is that when the founding fathers, the founding publishers back in 1827 did the very first black newspaper, they said they did it because for too long others have spoken for us. Now we wish to speak for ourselves. That hasn't changed. It's important to be able to tell your own story and to be able to tell your own story from your own perspective. And getting that message across to people is a real challenge in the current age, because oftentimes we don't understand how media and media images dictate and control how we are perceived, how we are presented, how we interact, and how we are allowed and empowered by what we do, and all of that feeds in together. Media is extremely important, and it's extremely important to own your own and to be able to tell your own story. And getting that message is a challenge.
Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to thank you for joining us today for this edition of Biorhythms. Stay tuned and tell all of your friends that there's something exciting happening in Hampton Roads. Biorhythms.